May 25, 1959. While Marshal Tito of Yugoslavia celebrates his 67th birthday, declared that year as Youth Day across his country, the first secretary of the Communist Party and premier of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, is on his way to Albania to visit the very leaders who proudly call themselves the most merciless enemies of Tito's heretical revisionism. The newspapers of Moscow and Tirana announced today that Khrushchev's visit to Albania would last from May 25 to June 6. But the fact that the Soviet leader's trip to Albania begins on May 25, Tito's birthday, is interesting not only for this coincidence, but also for another reason. It falls on the fourth anniversary of Khrushchev's pilgrimage to Canossa, in Belgrade on May 26, 1955. Does the coincidence of these two symbolic dates carry any hidden meaning? It is tempting to predict that this coincidence might be more ominous than fortunate for the Yugoslav, revisionist, leader. The anti-Yugoslav stance maintained by the Albanian leadership has always been one of the most important barometers reflecting the current state of relations between Moscow and Belgrade. Even during the period from May 1955 to November 1956, when all the other satellites adopted a friendly attitude toward Belgrade, the Albanian leaders stubbornly refused to soften their harsh anti-Tito position. Naturally, they could not have done so without Moscow standing behind them. So the question now arises. Is Nikita Khrushchev coming to Tirana to calm them down, or to stir them up even more? The answer to that question will be revealed in Tirana, in just a few days. Today's Albanian newspapers, mainly Ziri I Populit and Bashkimi, greeted Khrushchev's upcoming visit with great joy and indescribable enthusiasm. It is worth noting, however, that, at least according to the Albanian Telegraphic Agency's summaries of today's articles, there was no attack on Yugoslav revisionism. Only yesterday, on May 19, Bashkimi published a long article describing the terrible conditions of the Yugoslav peasantry, especially of the Albanian minority living in the regions of Kosovo and Metohija. Bashkimi added that the so-called specific Yugoslav road to socialism had, in fact, led the Yugoslav people into poverty. The article concluded that the renegade Tito clique was leading the peoples of Yugoslavia into one misfortune after another.
Yugoslav-Albanian relations, a brief history.
News agency reports from Belgrade stated that the announcement of Khrushchev's visit to Albania had once again brought to light the troubled issue of Yugoslav-Albanian relations. As already mentioned, these relations have never been good, not since Stalin's time, when Yugoslavia broke away from the Soviet bloc. At best, in the years after Stalin's death, they had been quiet. But anti-Yugoslav outbursts reached new heights last year, after a period of relative calm during the so-called thaw. The signal for the new campaign, in which both Albania and Communist China took part, the first being the smallest and the second the largest of the camp, was the publication, in March 1958, of the program of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia. The hard line became clear, and reached its peak after Tito's return from his Afro-Asian tour early that year, as mutual accusations of territorial ambitions began to fly. The Albanians, led by First Secretary Enver Hoxha, accused the Yugoslavs of collaborating with Greece in a plot to divide Albania between them. The Yugoslavs, in turn, tried and condemned Albanians as agents sent into Yugoslavia, with the aim of terror and sabotage, and of stirring unrest in the border regions to which, they said, Albanians had territorial claims. The Albanians for their part tried and sentenced several Yugoslav spies. While most other members of the Soviet bloc rushed to clear themselves during the short honeymoon period, after Khrushchev in May 1955 had blamed Stalinism for the anti-Yugoslav campaign, the Albanians had little choice but to remain silent. Moreover, they were the last to follow the Soviet lead in denouncing Stalin and to admit that breaking relations with Yugoslavia during Stalin's time had been a mistake. On the other hand, they were always the first to attack the Yugoslav revisionists. In fact, Albania never rehabilitated General Lieutenant Kosi Zox, who was executed in 1949 for the almost endemic crime of Titoism that later spread through the countries of Eastern Europe. The spirit of the communist leadership in Albania was vividly illustrated almost a year ago in the capital, Tirana, when party leader Enver Hoxha described the Yugoslav leaders as traitors, incorrigible revisionists, enemies of the Soviet Union and of Marxism, and hardened agents of American imperialism. Hoxha pledged to do everything possible to help sink these renegades of Marxism, Leninism into the swamp. His words were repeated often by Hoxha himself and by other Albanian spokesmen in the following months. The tension in relations between the two countries was reflected in the withdrawal of Yugoslavia's ambassador to Tirana, Arso Milatovic, in March 1958. No official announcement was made about appointing a new ambassador, but at the time, Belgrade hinted that the post might remain vacant. Diplomatic representation was left in the hands of a chargé d'affaires in Tirana. The withdrawal of the ambassador was preceded by official denials from Belgrade of the accusations that Yugoslavia and Greece had planned the partition of Albania. This denial came directly from President Tito in a speech in Skopje, Macedonia, on March 6, 1959, where he accused Albania and Bulgaria of being solely responsible for renewed Balkan tensions. Tito added that both Albania and Bulgaria were acting under orders from abroad. He did not identify who those foreigners were, but said that Hoxha would not have dared to take such actions on his own. That foreigner is now coming personally to Tirana.
And so, on the very day Tito celebrated his birthday, Khrushchev landed among the sworn enemies of Yugoslavia. Was it coincidence or a calculated signal to Belgrade? Another secret revealed by the black folder.